Hey, what's up all of you beautiful subscribers? Welcome back to the Chapple Show. So how are you going to get ready for the next economic collapse? That's what we're going to be talking about today. So the first thing I want to mention is that an economic collapse is much different than a stock market collapse. So here's why. Is that if the stock market were to go down 10%, that's like a mild correction. That happens, right? It goes down 10%. So I think that happened last month in the tech sector. That happens. All right. If it were to go down 20%, that's a bear market, not a good time to invest. And if it goes down 30, 35, 40% or more, that is a stock market crash. Okay. Now, if the economy, let's say of the United States, were to go down 30, 35, 40%, that would destroy the United States. It would be a completely different country after that, if that were to happen. Okay? So here's an example, is that during a recession, recessions typically last like 6 to 18 months or so. So during a recession, there's typically a GDP decline of like 1 to 5%. All right, that's what causes a recession. 1 to 5% decline in GDP. And like a depression or a really terrible recession is when it goes down like 8, 10, 12%. All right, 12% is that is a depression. That's an economic depression. That's a terrible thing for any economy, okay? So now again, when you look at, if you were to look, I think that the Great Depression's decline in GDP was somewhere around 12, 15 to 20%. So imagine if it were to go down 30, 35, 40% like the stock market does, that would just decimate a country, okay? So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about. Okay, so now during these recessions, during these times of bad economic times, when it's tough to get a job, when the companies start going belly up, who gets hurt the most? That's what we're going to talk about. Then we're going to relate this to you. So who gets hurt the most? Well, it's pretty much anyone with leverage. That's the first people I think of. Anyone with leverage tends to get hurt the most. Now, rich people with leverage, so what is leverage? Leverage is pretty much you're borrowing money to either invest, or you're borrowing money to start a company, or you're borrowing money to buy a house, whatever. People who are leveraged tend to have a tough time if they don't have any money in the bank. Okay, so here's an example. Remember 2008? Well, like the best example is 2008, like The Big Short. The movie The Big Short was about the recession 2008. In that movie, and in real life, there were people in like Las Vegas and people all around the United States who were pretty middle class, maybe upper middle class people, but they were buying like 2 or 3 houses, and they were just making enough to make the minimum payments to pay all those off. So what happens during a downturn? Well, all of a sudden, maybe they stop getting paid as much at their job. Maybe they get laid off. A couple of people get laid off. Maybe interest rates go up a little bit. All of a sudden, they cannot pay off their houses, and they go into bankruptcy and they lose everything. So people who are leveraged tend to have a rough time during these times. And another example actually during The Big Short was, I think that they had a scene where they mentioned a police officer who bought like $1 million house on pretty much a police officer's salary, which, you know, if you're a senior police officer, maybe $100,000, maybe $150,000 if you're a chief. But even so, if you're making $150,000, the maximum amount of house that you should be buying, let's say multiply that by, you know, roughly 4 or so, 4 to 5, it's about $600,000, maybe $700,000. So they're buying these $1 million homes. They were just making enough money to pay off the minimum every single month. And so again, when a bunch of bad stuff happens, during an economic collapse, they get hurt. They lose everything. Everything. So who else gets hurt? Let's see. Actually, yeah, so pretty much everyone with leverage, actually. Let's keep going on this, actually. So I was going to mention, where people are going to get hurt, what I've been seeing is that people leveraged in the stock market right now. I talk about the stock market a ton. And so if you're leveraged in the stock market and you're borrowing the bank's money to invest in stocks, what happens if there's a downturn? All of a sudden, you're losing twice the amount of money that you invested, 3 times the amount of money that you invested. So I'm interested to see what happens with a lot of the, the stock market people out there on YouTube that take out debt to invest in the stock market. That's what leverage is. So, and, people that are, I'm also interested, this is from Gary Vaynerchuk. I'm also interested to see what happens with the fake entrepreneurs out there, the ones that are like taking pictures on the private jet. They got like one knee up, climbing up, and they have a picture of just like, yeah, this is my life now, but they like rented it out and they're sharing it with like 500 other people. And meanwhile, they could have just gotten the same flight for, half price taking a typical economy class, but they wanted the picture for Instagram, right? They wanted the picture for Instagram. So I'm interested to see what happens with them. So who else gets hurt during this? Don't worry, we're going to relate this to you soon. The middle class. And this is people of all ages. So everyone in the middle class, especially if you're living paycheck to paycheck, it really sucks. So typically here's who gets hurt the most in each age class. Okay, a 22-year-old, for example, looking for your first job out of university or out of college. Maybe you have some student debt you got to pay off, right? Some student debt to pay off and you want to get a job, but however, it's during bad economic times, no one's really hiring. That's what happens. Unemployment goes way, way up. Unemployment will pretty much double during a recession, might even triple during a depression. So it's going to be tough getting a job. 22-year-olds, young people looking for jobs, that's tough. No one's hiring. Companies are going belly up. There's not a lot of job openings out there. So again, another example, a 30-year-old with a new family, bought your first house. You got a mortgage. Maybe you have 2 cars, right, for you and your partner. And you got a new kid on the way maybe when you're in your early 30s. You have a bunch of responsibility. However, your income and your savings are not that much. If you're in your early 30s, you're just starting to do that stuff for the most part. And they get hurt, honestly, 30-year-olds get hurt a lot. Again, as I mentioned before, maybe the payments on your mortgage have to go up. Maybe one of you or your partner lose your job. There's a bunch of things that can happen where you can lose everything. So people in their 30s get hurt. A 40-year-old, maybe you have to dip into your kid's college fund if you even have that, right? 50-year-olds, now the problem with 50-year-olds is that this could be the most painful for 50-year-olds that are living paycheck to paycheck. Now, if you're 50, odds are you have some savings. Odds are, if you're 50, 55, 60 years old, you probably have a few $100,000 in some 401k or some savings account somewhere. So you can dip into that. However, what happens with a lot of 50-year-olds during economic downtime or a downturn in the economic cycle is that they tend to get laid off because they're 50, 55, 60 years old. They're making more money and typically they have more experience in maybe one skill, but they do not have any of the new skills that a lot of companies need. And so they're expensive and they're not producing as much as maybe a 20-year-old could. So they get laid off. The company needs to save money, so they want to downsize. They lay off a lot of old people making too much money, and they try to hire some really young interns. That's what happens with a lot of companies during an economic downturn. So a lot of 50-year-olds get hurt a lot by this. And again, that 20-year-old who's coming in, they're not going to be getting paid a lot of money even if they do get a job. That's pretty much who gets the worst. So who gets hurt a lot? So now we're going to move on to what can you do here. This is what this video is really centered about, but I pretty just wanted to set up here. Anyone can get hurt by an economic collapse. Anyone. Okay. So one thing that you can do is build your savings. This is probably the number one thing you can do if you are a typical middle class or just struggling to get by, or maybe you're a very young person, have your first job. Try to build up your savings as much as possible because, again, you could easily lose your job. I mean, let's think about 2008 again. Unemployment rate in like 2006, 2007 was about 4.5%, which was a pretty good unemployment rate. Within the span of pretty much a few months, within a year, that unemployment rate went up to about 10%. It more than doubled during the recession. So 1 out of every 10 people did not have a job that wanted one. That's an astounding number, 1 out of 10. So that's not even accounting for the people that don't want jobs that don't get included in this number. I talk about that so much, but like people who aren't looking for jobs don't count as unemployed, which is a really, really strange thing. And if that's not even accounting for very old people and young people that can't work, or really, what I'm trying to say here is that really only 40% of the population is working at any one time. But anyways, let's move on here. So build your savings. So be prepared. So typically what I say, and what Dave Ramsey says too, I say this, is typically you should have, about 6 months, 3 to 6 months minimum of savings that you could live off of. So if your monthly expenses are $2,000, you should ideally have at least $12,000 in your bank account that you could live off of, just in case you get laid off during some bad times. Now, during a really bad recession, maybe you want to prepare more. Maybe you want to have a year's worth of savings. Because, I mean, recessions and depressions, they can last, I mean, really the worst parts typically only last 1 to 2 years at most, but it could take another additional 3 to 4 years for the economy to fully recover before maybe the economic times are good enough for you to get the job that you want again. Maybe you have to take a part-time job somewhere during the 1 to 2, 3, 4 years that the economy is in a downturn. Anyways, so let's see. Yeah, so minimum I'd say about 6 months, maybe even save 12 months of whatever your expenses are. Have that in your bank account. That's one of the best things you can do. Another thing you can do is cut dumb expenses. This goes into the same thing as savings. Yeah, just cut dumb expenses. I mean, you don't need that $100 jacket or sweater. You don't need it. And I know typically females are for clothing. It's more females tend to be worse at spending on clothing. Males, it's more of like toys, of like gadgets and stuff. So like if you're a female, you don't need that $100 jacket or sweater. You have 7 of them. All right. And look at guys. You don't need now. Guys tend to spend less frequently, but have bigger purchases on dumb stuff. So guys will get like a $500 drone because you want to try it out and for fun, right? You don't need it. What are you going to use it for? You're going to use it once, unless it's for work or something. You don't need it. You don't need it right now. If you're struggling to get by, don't buy dumb stuff. That's the worst thing you can do to prepare for an economic downturn. That $500 or $1,000, $100, $400 is going to mean much more to you if you get laid off during a recession, or if maybe you're running a business and your customers can't afford to pay you as much, so you can't pay yourself as much. So maybe you're just making much less money. That extra few hundred dollars is going to mean a lot to you, I promise. Okay. Another thing you can do quickly, don't rely on one source of income. Don't rely on one source of income. This is it's going to be really tough because the next economic, downturn should happen roughly in the next 6 months. It should happen sometime in the next 6 to 8 months. And, we will see. So it's going to be tough for you to open up another source of income right now. A lot of the times that could take a year or two to get that up and going. But this is one of the things you can do just to prepare. Maybe you have your main job where you make $40,000, $50,000 a year, and maybe you have a side gig that makes you $5,000, $10,000 a year. All right, so that's extra $5,000 or $10,000. If you get laid off at your main job, that side job will at least help bridge the gap between when you're fired and the time when you get your next job. So having a side gig or another source of income, it could even be like real estate or stocks or something, although we're going to get into that in a second here. But having another source of income, typically a side job is a good thing to have to prepare for an economic collapse. Let's move on to, cash on hand. This is what Mark Cuban calls the World Series of investing. It is have cash on hand during an economic collapse. So typically when there's an economic collapse and the stock market goes down, people are unemployed, businesses are going bankrupt, having money on hand to invest in the things that are going down is a very good thing. It's, again, Mark Cuban calls it the World Series of investing. You're pretty much, if you wanted to invest in the stock market in late 2008, you would be getting about 50 to 55, 60% discounts on the biggest stocks out there. The entire S&P 500 went down like 50%. And so having some cash on hand to play with, not savings, but this is separate. So you have your savings, and then you also have money that you could potentially invest during a downturn in the economy. Using that money to invest you get everything discounted. It's a really good time to buy. Like, for example, Warren Buffett too. He had billions of dollars in cash on hand during 2008, and he used it to invest in companies like Goldman Sachs. And just because he had that cash on hand, just like $5-10 billion, on that $5 or $10 billion, he made billions of dollars. From he got, within the span of a few years, he made like 20, 30, 40, 50% returns. Sometimes, on certain areas where he invested even more than that. In just a few years, he made billions of dollars just because he had cash on hand to buy out discounted stocks and companies. All right, so that's something to think about. Let's move on to the next thing here. Yeah, so investing is cheap. Let's see, we moved on to that here. Oh yeah, so another thing too is just not just stocks too, but I mean, right now, I mean, I don't want to tell you what to do with your life. You want to do whatever, you can do whatever you want. But now might not be the best time to buy a house if you are getting your first house. I would say potentially if you buy a house, but maybe buy one that you could afford, even if you were to get your income cut in half or something like that, or cut down by 30-40%. That's what I would say if you're going to buy one. Because here's the thing, is that during an economic collapse, one of the things that almost always happens is real estate prices go down. Now, it's not always in the big areas like New York and LA and some of the cities where people just want to move there anyways. The prices will go down, but just not as much. But almost always during economic collapse, you can buy discounted real estate for the most part. And so that's something to look out for during the next recession. So if you have cash on hand, look out for some properties. If you want to get your first house, or maybe you want to upgrade a house, potentially look at the market during that time. All right, let's move on to the next thing here. Yeah, so I talked about, yeah, so avoid leverage. Again, we've already talked about this and I'll move on to some different stuff in a second, but yeah, so avoid real estate. I already jumped onto that, but also avoid things like buying your dream car right now. I know economic times are really good right now for most people, really good. But if you're making, $100,000 and you want to buy, a $60,000 beautiful car that you've always dreamed of, and maybe you've been making good money for the last 5 years or so, you have some savings, but you want to take out debt to buy that dumb car, don't do that right now. I would say don't do that unless you're unless you can pay cash for your dream car, probably don't get it for the most part, because it's never a good idea and people always regret it. But yeah, so avoid dumb leverage, avoid leverage in stocks, avoid leverage, over leveraging in real estate, avoid leverage in buying any dumb stuff. That's another good thing you can do. Let's see. Oh yeah, one of the last things I want to talk about actually is that this is a strangely good time after the economic collapse happens, a good time to start a business. So I know what you're saying, like, you're saying to start a business during an economic collapse? Isn't that like the worst thing that you could do? Well, no, it's really bad when you have a business before the economic collapse. But during one, it's kind of a good time to start, because here's what happens, is that it weeds out all of the competitors for the most part. A lot of competitors go bankrupt, and money starts flowing out, starts getting out of like startups and starts getting out of businesses, and money's flowing out. People are scared to invest in companies, so it's tough to get startup funding. So again, you have less competition. Again, people are afraid to start businesses too. People are afraid because all you're hearing, all these businesses are going belly up. I don't want to start one. I don't want to get into that. I don't want to lose all of my money. So one of the best times to actually start a business is during an economic collapse. Now, here's the thing, is that I know it's going to be here. It's bad because it's tough to get money during that time. And it's also a little bit more difficult to get some customers. It's, if you don't have tons of money, customers also don't have a lot of money in a lot of those cases. So, but it is a good time to start. I mean, here's the thing, is that the recession during 2008 really ended in like 2010. And so here's the companies here's just like 3 or 4 or 5 companies that started during that time. All right. We're talking about like Airbnb, Uber, Instagram, Wish. There's a bunch more. There's tons of companies that started 2008, 2009, 2010 when there was no money in the system. And they were able to do it. I mean, here's a lot of things too, is that with tech specifically, tech, the cost to actually get into to start a tech company, if you know how to code and if you have a server, which is, your startup costs to start a tech company are really a few $1,000s. And then after that is just advertising costs and marketing and hiring people. But to get into a tech business during an economic recession, it's not that expensive to get into, and it's a good time to get into it. Because a lot of the tech here's another thing too, is that the tech companies that started before a recession specifically, they typically do not make profits. A lot of early ones, yes, Amazon, Apple, all the established ones make money now, but a lot of the startups that are just got funded $100 million, a lot of them have really high burn rates. So they're burning $5, $10, $15, $20 million a month. Now, during a recession, they're burning more money. because customers can't pay as much. They don't want to use their service. The customers don't have money, so they bring in less revenue. Now all of a sudden their burn rate's 25, 30, $35 million a month. They go belly up. Okay, so a lot of the tech companies get hurt a lot because they don't make profits off the bat. Now, a lot of other different kinds of businesses do make profits. Most other ones do off the bat. Well, not off the bat, but within the first few years, tech companies might not even make profits for 5, 10 years down the line. If you're starting a real estate company, you can make money right away. If you're starting like a restaurant, you can make money right away. It really depends on the business, but tech, you almost always lose money at the start these days. And so that's why they go belly up, which is kind of why it's a good time to start a business during an economic collapse for tech and just for anything in general. I mean, so anyways, these are some of the things that you can do. Do you agree with them? I think that I covered pretty much the whole spectrum of a lot of the people that watch these videos. Like, we covered personal finance, we covered investing, we covered entrepreneurship, which is the 3 real main things I talk about on this channel. So I've got a couple questions for you. One of which is, when do you think that the next recession is going to happen? All right, because I've made the video, I made it last year. I said that the recession should be coming sometime around now. See, everything looks really good right now, right? Everything looks great from the United States economy. It's like, oh, unemployment's at an all-time low, stock market's at an all-time high, or near all-time highs. It went down last month. Everything looks good right now. But this is generally the time where there's a sharp decline. When everything is just going so well, that's when it collapses. And I always talked about, as I mentioned in the video that I made last year too, is that through the entire history of the United States economy, the entire history, going back 400 years, there has never been a time where we have gone more than 10 years without going through an economic downturn, recession, or whatever that may be. Never. More than 10 years. Now, here's where I messed up on my video from last year, is that I counted 2008 as the end of as the peak of the downturn, as the end of the recession. That's kind of what as the peak of the downturn of the recession. But meanwhile, it actually happened in 2009. And so I don't want to be correcting myself or be one of those guys, but correcting it, the next recession should be happening sometime in early to mid 2019 if you go by the data. So we have probably another 6 to 8 to 12 months or so before it happens at most. We will see what happens. Maybe you agree. Maybe this time is different. It usually never is, but maybe this time is different. Maybe we won't go through an economic downturn. But what do you guys think of all this? Let me know in the comments down below. And what do you guys think you should do during an economic collapse, or how to prepare for it? What are you guys doing? For me, I'm having as much cash on hand as possible. I'm trying to limit my expenses right now. That's what I'm trying to do. Just trying to stock up a little bit of money. I'm still obviously trying to grow my businesses here, but I'm trying to hold on to a little bit more cash just in case something happens. And I'm prepared to deeply dive in to like Facebook ads, Google ads, as soon as there's an economic downturn, when all of the small businesses pull out and go belly up. Now, I'm still advertising with all that. I'm starting to get back into it actually now. But as soon as they go belly up and the ad prices go down, I'm going to put everything else I have into it to get people to my company that's not going to go belly up during the next economic collapse. So I'd like to, which is Joisk, by the way. My company is Joisk. So go check that out in joisk.com. It's e-commerce marketplace. We're posting more stuff in there. And thank you all for posting t-shirts. Some of them are really, really funny. I mean, I don't know. I think that there's more t-shirts on there than, I think I made some. Like I made like 5 or 10, but there's like what? 40 or like, I don't know, 30 by people they're not me. So thank you guys very much for trying that out. We're going to be going full board very soon. I just started advertising a little bit again, and we're going to be going full board into advertising really soon. So I've already seen an uptick in traffic today, and I just started the ads. So anyways, I'd like to thank you very much for watching. Remember to hit the subscribe and the like button down below. And thank you very much for watching. You're all very beautiful people. I'll see you guys in the next video.